Okay, well, good afternoon. I'm Amy Hibbard, the Communications Director with Geezeo, and I wanted to just take a moment to thank you all for participating in today's roundtable on the myths and realities of IoT banking. We're really excited to present this to you today. Again, like I said, this is a roundtable style, so our moderator, Greg Early, is going to introduce each of the panelists. Then I'm going to come back on and I'm going to do a poll question for the audience, and then Greg's going to move into asking the panelists some questions to start the discussion going. The panelists can interact with one another and chime in when they want. This group of panelists brings a very knowledgeable, diverse perspective on the world of AI and voice, and I think it's going to make for an informative and engaging conversation. At the end, we're going to take a few minutes for questions from the audience. So if you have any questions that you think of, during the presentation, please type them into the question section of the control panel on your sidebar, and then I'll get to them at the very end. So without any further delay, I'm going to pass this over to Greg.
Hello, I'm Greg Early. I'm the Strategic Content Director at Geezeo, and I'm very excited that we have this panel of some of the leading fintech minds with us today. What I thought would be most helpful at this point is that if we connected some voices to the names, so if the panelists could introduce themselves, then we can have a better idea of what voice we're listening to, and then we can move forward from there. Aaron, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, I'm Aaron Janad. I'm VP of Product for Geezeo. I oversee our overall product roadmap and our strategic development, and we're excited for the emergence of many of these technologies and cautiously watching many of them in the marketplace.
Tracy?
Great. Hi, I'm Tracy Dunlap. I'm the Chief Experience Officer at Zemonics, and I'm responsible for the customer experiences across our digital API, both from the banker side as well as the consumer side.
John?
Hi, my name is John Best. I am the CEO and the founder of Best Innovation Group, and I was one of the developers and main developers on our 5 product, which is the Alexa, Google Home, and now excited to announce a few different chatbots, including Telegram and Discord, and the AI behind it.
And Zach.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me on. I'm Zach Miller. I'm the founder of Tearsheet. Tearsheet is a modern media firm that focuses on the impact that technology is having on the financial services industry. I've been doing this for quite a few years and have also had a few roles on the sales and marketing side for some of the leading fintech companies.
And so, Amy, are we doing the poll now?
Yeah, we've got a couple polls to send out to the audience. The first one I wanted to ask is, do you currently use a personal digital assistant? And anybody from the audience can go ahead and answer this, and then I'll present you guys with the findings when it pops up. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And it looks like we've got about 67% of you all that do not currently use a personal digital assistant. So that actually, that seems a little bit higher than I would have thought. I would have thought there might have been more people that use them. Let me go ahead. Let's do the other one. If you answered yes, which personal assistant do you use on a regular basis? And you can choose one of these, and the Amazon Echo, which is Alexa, Cortana, Google Assistant, Siri, or some other sort of personal assistant. All right, we'll go ahead and close the poll, and let's see. It looks like the Echo wins on about 57% of respondents who use the Amazon Echo, and then the next being Siri from Apple phone and devices, and then other. So appreciate those. It just kind of gives us a feel for where people are at with personal assistants and voice assistants. And so I'll just pass that on to Greg now.
Good deal. Well, to get this rolling, I guess today there was big news in the fintech world. Fiserv and First Data have announced a $22 billion merger. And I thought that might be the best way to start off the panel is what message do you all think this sends regarding the transformation in the financial sector when such big players are looking to digital for the new marketplace?
I'll jump in if you want me to go first.
Sure.
This is John Best. I think the message this sends is that we're still seeing sort of the consolidation, and it's amazing. It's a $22 billion company they acquired. I mean, that just gives you some idea of the scale of Fiserv at this point. But it's a pretty obvious conclusion if you look at their acquisitions in the past around bill payment. You know, you look at check free. It makes some sense that payments are really the fighting ground that everybody sort of expects to see things next. They lead to deposits. We've seen the degradation of liquidity as we see people move things to Venmo and all over the other places, and this will give them a lot of freedom from a processing standpoint. It's a big play, but it certainly adds another Lego that's pretty important into their stack. So to me, it was surprising it was such a big company. I would have seen something different. But if you look at FIS, that's kind of a similar model, and they really didn't have that Lego in their stack. That's my 2 cents on it. I guess to answer your second part of your question is what it means is that we're continuing to see this consolidation, and I think that it's interesting because it sort of is inviting this thought of a one-stop shop for a lot of stuff where, you know, a financial institution could really just sort of jump into Fiserv and get full court payments, home banking, mobile, Black Knight mortgages, you know, turnkey solution for everything. But we all know that even when they make these acquisitions, it takes a lot of time to get that connectivity. And I would throw this at Tracy, you know, given her stated position in the organization, it's not trivial to acquire anything like this and build it into sort of the universe in a way that's meaningful and thoughtful in the platform. So that's, to me, is the big hump they got to get over. But that's what I think that the message Fiserv is trying to send the market is, we're your one-stop shop. We have everything you need.
I would agree. That's very similar to what we've seen across the industry when you're bringing these components in, kind of meshing that together, and the integration of those services becomes, I think, the challenging part. But it truly is kind of bringing, instead of building, bringing those services into the mix. In the past, I think many people would try to accomplish it by building or developing that out at that size, where now they're able to kind of bring in best in breed and utilize those services to get things to market in a much faster way.
So this almost seems like the maturation of fintech within the context of, if you look at other technologies like biotech and the pharmaceutical industry, where smaller, the bigger companies decide that it's easier to go buy a specialist than it is to try to create that within themselves. So now it seems what you're saying is the vertical integration is now happening within the context of the financial services marketplace. Is that where you all are going with that?
That certainly is one of the takeaways from this transaction, and both organizations have also been hungry as far as acquisitions. So they both not only have large core product offerings, but then lots of ancillary products around what their payments and core processing initial spots in the market are. So there's a lot of different layers to start to dissect in this transaction and really understand how the different components are going to play together. It's a really exciting transaction.
And if you look at their previous acquisition of ACI, it's almost like they bought like a printer ink company and then realized they wanted the printer too, or vice versa. But you know, there's a dependency on that kind of switching software, the base 24, kind of the transaction processing. But that's where the world is, right? You know, the micro transactions are coming, and I think we're going to bust this model, the subscription model that's out there. I think we're going to see that go away to, you know, you send me an article and yeah, I don't want to pay $6.99 a month for the rest of my life because I can't remember how to go turn it off to read the one article that Aaron sent me. I would pay maybe 10 cents right then and there or something. And I think that's going to build volume in the transaction space across things like Zelle, Venmo, all of, especially the one that's really just been blowing up, which is Cash App. And so I think they see that, and they know there's also, I kind of quantify everything in the offense or defense. Something I learned from John Ainsworth, formerly from MasterCard, now the CEO of C Ledger. And I would look at this as a defensive move as well, in my opinion.
How so?
Well, I think that if they're going to see that a good amount of their clients' income as well as their income is going to be related to something that's diminishing, then controlling the other side of it, particularly the transactions at the switch, makes a lot of sense. In other words, we're continuing to see the degradation of interchange income. We're continuing to see the degradation and spreading of deposits. Everything's taken a bite out of the apple. There's 20 bucks sitting over at Venmo. There's 30 bucks sitting over at PayPal, so forth and so on. And then there's the final piece of it, which is, okay, what happens when the switch starts to circumvent the systems or there's direct connectivity? In this case, they've bought a major player that would provide them that connectivity, as at least from a strategic standpoint, in the future. So it really well positions them. I mean, there is no bigger player than First Data in that regard, other than maybe WorldPay. And as globalization continues to occur, there's going to be even more options around that. So I think it's a good defensive play. You keep it in your stable. It's definitely a moneymaker. But if you need to use it to transform your business, you definitely have that opportunity now.
Cool. So let's take this back to the other aspect of fintech that we're talking about today, and that is really IoT. And because you all are on one facet or another focused on this piece of the marketplace, how has IoT impacted your business from your perspective? Aaron, do you want to start?
Sure, absolutely. So from our point of view, we started to see really mobile is where we started to see the emergence of some of the devices and the interconnectivity. So we started to watch that channel evolve and the consumer get closer and closer. Wearables was the next really evolution into this broader ecosystem of devices, and we've seen that really take over as far as notifications. So people love watching and monitoring and staying close to what's going on with the wearables on their wrist. And we're going to start to see that really expand out. We now see voice assistants and the emergence of AI and ML from some of the giants like Google and Amazon, allowing some of the natural language processing to be available to us to start to build our platforms on. We're starting to see this ever changing but never stopping interface, where we went from using a screen to the mobile. Now I'm wearing the technology and it's surrounding me with voice, and omni-channel is not really a good way to describe it, because it's almost omnipresence now, and continuing to evolve into our lives. So we're watching this evolve into how we can deliver our solutions.
And Tracy, this must be an interesting challenge from the UX perspective as well.
It's a great challenge from the UX perspective. Really, at the end of the day, it is all still about the customer. So whether we're designing a journey that's moving across the mobile device or one that is voice related, it's still about making it as efficient and as frictionless as possible for the customer. So for us, when we are building out our journeys, those still work fairly similar. The challenge is something that Aaron mentioned, is the pace of change and the expectation that consumers are having. in their everyday life, they're experiencing things that are happening in instant. They're looking at companies like Amazon and other large tech firms, and they're comparing those experiences. So when we move over to financial services, we can't just have that one-way communication any longer. We can't just have one or two ways to interact with the financial institution. This is something that continues to move forward. So from an experience standpoint, it is a rapid adjustment. And what we're finding is it's not just related to a standard visual design any longer. It's thinking about, looking at it from a writing standpoint and voice activated and conversational banking. These are consistently changing. So again, for us, it is always back to convenience for the customer and building our journeys as such.
And Zach, I have to, as a former journalist, I have to imagine that the level of press releases and trigger words like IoT that come across your desk these days have got to be thicker and taller than ever, virtually speaking, of course. What are you seeing in this new IoT-driven world?
It's interesting you mentioned that, because actually this morning I was pitched by a blockchain company that was delivering advertisements and monitoring and sort of verification of delivery to media companies. I just thought that was sort of backwards, but it's interesting in terms of at least the volume of IoT press releases. We did hit a crescendo last year, probably midway through the year, through the summer, and then a lot of those announcements died off on the back end of the year. And to me, it sort of felt like, that was the end of the beginning of the cycle, with the kind of the hype was around it. A lot of first products came out, especially the banks as they launched their chat bots and got the PR out of it. And now they're going back to work to actually make these things work and get clients and users interacting with them. Where I've seen the most IoT actually is not necessarily in banking, but in the insurance industry, where there is some type of hardware component and an ongoing feedback loop that some of these smart companies are using. Less so in banking. I think we're still trying to find our way there, but I think we're still in the experimental stage from what I've seen and the people I've spoken to in terms of really figuring this stuff out.
So there's sort of a technology that they're capable of deploying, but then refining that deployment to actually be useful is kind of a challenge. And I mean, the transition there is to you, John. I mean, you already have that going. What have you seen when you're talking to prospective clients and the general public?
The thing we've seen so far is the two use cases is obviously sort of displacing the mobile app or the home banking app, at least at the home, for simple things like balances. The habit building is really what we've noticed more than anything else, and what we've seen in the numbers with the crayons that we're working with is, once somebody sort of finds their way to simply get that balance, it becomes a habit, kind of like the timer function, and that's pretty interesting. And then the other side of it that's actually been really cool is working with, we have a group we call the Innovation Club, which is a conglomerate of big crayons that we work with to sort of come up with ideas. And one of the big things we've come up with is sort of this knowledge base use case, where a teller or somebody needs to know how to do something, and they could sort of ask that question, how do I ever, and get kind of talked through it or sent a link. It was interesting to see some of those different use cases. And then we've had a couple different industries come to us. One being, I would say the most predominant one we're seeing a lot of interest from is the medical industry, specifically around things for senior citizens, ADA. There's a lot of folks that, it makes a lot more sense, and it's a lot easier to use for our seniors. And I'll tell you, my mom has an Alexa, and if it could go to the bathroom for her, she'd never get up again. The other day she did something I didn't even know it could do. She said she heard the dog in a different room, and she said, Alexa, drop in on this room. And it's like her dog's room. And Alexa popped into that room, and you could hear what was going on in there. It was just, I didn't even know it could do that. So, it's one of those things where I think that we're seeing that as a big play as well. And given this, all of us are going through these ADA regs, and it's really difficult to really get the websites into that space, particularly with higher functionality. This seems to be a real good answer for that as well.
Yeah, that's. Go ahead.
I would also echo, the thing that changed for us was really this idea, and I think Tracy really spelled it out, of voice UX. And you can talk 26,000 times faster than you could write, as I'm doing right now. And it's interesting because there are so many things when you think outside the box. There is no book or model right now on voice UX. You sort of have to figure it out yourself. And I'll give you an example. One of the things we've been working on is this idea of having something sort of latently stay in state. Aaron and I were discussing this. So if it is that you said, let's say you were setting up a payment, but you get to a certain point and it asks for something you don't have. If we're in a model or a modal environment or on a website or something, it's kind of like, well, I don't have this. My session's going to time out. There isn't really a way to sort of save state. But with a voice thing, you could just say, I'll get back to you. And it'll remind you later and say, hey, did you ever get this? Because it can finish that transaction. It just, the way you even think about it, and I think that's what Tracy was trying to say, has to be completely different than a piece of paper. Otherwise, you wind up with just a duplicate of your voice response unit, or your interactive voice unit that you have already in your shop. And that, I want to make clear, is not what you're going for. I think she really hit the nail on the head when she said that customer journey has to be very different. And there's so many cool options that you can do with this for that journey.
Yeah, and I think also that the written language and the spoken language are totally different in the way that they're structured and built, and the power that they have for IoT and that user experience. And I think this goes back to what you were just saying and what Zach was saying too. I'd sort of like to explore, given the value that's inherent in these technologies, what is the current state? Not where are we going or what might there be, but what is the current state of where we are? I mean, what's the baseline that we're at right now as you see it regarding IoT in the financial community?
I think we're in the Napster mode for me. I feel like we're driving towards a much bigger play, and there's some things coming into play for that, like voice biometrics, that are going to take it really, really far forward. I also think that as we look at identity, particularly things like passwords, there's a big struggle. I don't know if anybody on this call, is happy with the number of usernames and passwords they have, then let me know so we can call you, get you a straitjacket. But the idea that voice biometrics, those sorts of things, could change things significantly, I think is very valuable. But I still think we're kind of in that ramp up phase. So I think we're doing the obvious low hanging fruit, but the really cool stuff is yet to come.
You all agree with that? Tracy?
I would agree. We see it really, it can be based on the size of the institution as well. And really, we still have some that are dipping their toe into the mobile water, right? So you've got those varying sides of the coin there. But certainly, yeah, for us, the voice piece is something that is really starting to pick up steam quite a bit. And I think we're going to see that emerge. I think we've all sat through a demo. We've heard a person ask Alexa about their budget or something like that. But just building on that and bringing to the table so many additional features and understanding the customer is going to change things tremendously. Getting that insight into what's going on with the customer, taking advantage of the data. That's really, I think, where we're going to see the biggest pickup, at least with the clients that I've been working with. That's been kind of the focus point for them.
Well, and Tracy, I love what you just said. Like, when we're working with a website, we're working with mobile, we really don't have any idea of the emotional state of the customer. But imagine with voice, you actually could. Like, I see tools down the road, they're going to say, this person's really ticked. We got to maybe try to help them out or do something. I just think there's going to be I'm just trying to expand everybody's mind. I'm not saying that's the big change, but like thinking out of the box like that, that's the big game changer, I think, for this particular channel.
For sure,
That-
and thinking about that customer's feelings. I mean, that's the motivation behind what they're doing, right? Everybody has goals, and how they're feeling while they're trying to achieve those is so important. So what you're saying is so key, and it gives us another piece of insight into helping to take them to the next level. It's so important.
So I have a cool term for it that I've been using internally. I call it digital empathy. Yeah, that's where we're trying to get to.
And that's key as we start to evolve our interfaces too. So beyond just staring at the screen, we're moving more into this conversational mechanism of communicating with the end user. So it may start on a screen and then move to voice and then move to the risk later and then move to the teller the next time I visit the branch itself. And it's the context. We've all hammered on the context. And we really need to recognize that, and that empathy goes beyond just one conversation. I could have been a frequent visitor, and having those data points and being able to build that overall conversation and deliver it across all of them. That's the exciting thing. And the bank's in a unique position as well as being that trusted platform that they could even potentially start to extend that out and offer that to other players in the market as well. So this where the bank goes with IoT and trust and passwords is, as you had mentioned, there's some exciting opportunities here.
Well, and I would go a step further to say that it's also a defensive move. I think you know, a lot of economists are pointing out possible recession in 2020, and if you look at this as a channel that could, you know, allow you to keep growing without extensively growing FTE, and basically taking a subset of these very common and you know, transactions off the table to an RPA type process, then now, you know, it's gonna put you in a better position to survive a downturn like that, you know, or you know, something coming in that way, because you're gonna have some options.
Well, it's an interesting concept to actually think of the financial industry as the one that could be leading this charge into other industries, since usually because of the regulation and because of all the issues, the complicated issues underneath of it all, that it tends to flow the other way, that more dynamic, more loosely regulated industries tend to adopt these quicker because they're just easier to build for. But that's a compelling idea, Aaron, that you could actually reverse the process and move it forward. And you're sort of on the front line with all this because you're taking the ideas and actually having to build the APIs and the SDKs and everything else for these things. So how close is that to marrying up the desires with the realities?
We see it happening to some degree with the emergence of standards like PSD2 in across the pond, and the bank then becoming a platform. So it's definitely something that's talked about pretty commonly. But that also, as the emergence of the technology expands as well, there's that security boundary that the two could mesh well.
Moving on a little bit, where are we with the IoT platforms? I think I'm hearing that voice is pretty much the one that seems to be the big one at this point, and where it might take us in the future. But what do you see as the most commonly deployed IoT platforms that have traction at this point? Zach, do you want to start?
Yeah, I would echo what you just said. I mean, I think voice is where most of the attention is being focused. You know, we've seen some experimentation with like beacons in retail banking environments, and I wouldn't classify that as any more than just experimentation. Again, I look to the insurance industry. I think they're a little bit further ahead in terms of real embedding of sensors and the feedback loops, and like I mentioned before. But I haven't really seen, you know, your poll in the beginning I thought was interesting. Like, you know, most people on Alexa, I think they seem to have sort of a tighter grip on in terms of platforms, but I don't think we've seen anybody emerge yet to be a true leader.
Anybody else have any feedback on that?
I would also say the emergence of kind of AI camera devices is really compelling. And we're starting to see more of that. We have a lot of people asking us about some of the work we've done with Alexa tied to a camera. So for instance, hey, Alexa, where's my wallet? Or there's a camera in the room that says, okay, well, last time I saw it was on the table. And these are open databases that are not open databases, but open, I call them classes, classifications that are out there for things like TensorFlow and some of these other AI perspectives. And so I think there's a lot of use for that in the banking industry, both with ATMs, with back office. You can always add to security, and I think there's some value in that down the road. In terms of like platforms that are emerging, obviously Alexa is the big play, but I would say Google Home is right on their tail. The big loser, in my opinion, is Siri, because the HomePod really just didn't pick up. There still isn't really a good way to interface with it that's meaningful. And the surprise for me, if I had to say, hey, which of these is the most interesting to work with? The most underrated one is Cortana. And I could see Cortana really having a lot of, I got to be careful when I say it because my Cortana will wake up, but Cortana really having some use case with the world sort of being really kind of tied into Windows 10 at this point, and some voice into web apps and into those kinds of things. So that'd be my thought process. And I would point you at Google's, I don't know if you remember this, but earlier, actually last year, Google did that demonstration where they had the assistant call the hair salon. That to me was a game changer. That was pretty, now you're going to need sort of a reverse Turing test, to determine if you're really talking to somebody or not. But it was pretty fantastical to think about.
10 times. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. So, that to me is sort of the promise to come. And I think that's where Google is heading. So just thought processes there.
I'd completely agree with all of that. Google is definitely catching Alexa and Amazon very quickly. Their installed base is growing very fast, and the using the Google Assistant, there's actually a lot more. It's a lot more capable in a lot of ways, despite Alexa having a massive lead in the actual number of skills that are available for it. And Microsoft does have an enormous installed base and only growing that. And I'd also add Hound into that as well, as they offer an engine that's embeddable. And a lot of the deployed engines rely on their technology. And to watch where these four are going to go is very interesting. I think there's a ton of growth in this area, especially as we start to see new form factors come out for voice assistants. This is going to become a very personal experience very quickly, I think.
Well, and I've seen that a lot of them are now looking to, they're partnering up with builders to sort of integrate these technologies into houses. So I have to imagine that, that's just one more level that, you can layer into your financial institutions, and anything else that you need voice for would be just to build it into a house would be the ultimate install. Never mind a computer or anything else. This question is, and I know everyone here is in fintechs, but there's a lot of, while there's talk, I think, the Innovators Dilemma, the book was talked about how while people see smaller companies as always being the innovators, that sometimes it's the big corporations that actually come up with the ideas. They just don't know how to get them forward to create those major disruptions in technologies. And I see that kind of playing out within the financial industry right now, where you have a huge amount of fintechs that are out there. Some are finding that, some of the discussions now are about whether integration with larger financial institutions is the future, or whether fintechs are going to disrupt and disable some of the way people see banking, or whether the FIs are putting together things. And I also know that we have folks from Wells Fargo and BB&T and ABA on the phone with us today. So, and I know that Jim Cramer from CNBC recently was talking about Bank of America that just came out with earnings and compared it to the Amazon of financial stocks because of its moves into digitalization of its banking platforms. So where do you all see the disruptors? Is it primarily fintechs that are doing it? Are big FIs out there making strides, or are they, is it more a plug and play kind of thing where they're buying smaller fintech companies or partnering with them? What's the movement on that level? Zach, why don't you start us out with this, since you see a lot this from a different perspective?
Yeah, again, it's hard to talk about innovation at scale because a lot of the newer players may be coming out with novel technologies and novel models, but they clearly don't have as much traction or exposure to large client bases that the big guys have. But to me, one of the most exciting things out there are these challenger banks, primarily in Europe, but they are onboarding hundreds of thousands of people a day. So at some of them. And Revolut and N26 in particular have both made it clear that they're applying for U.S. banking license and will launch in the U.S. sometime this year. And so again, I don't think Bank of America should be worried about them just yet, but they are nipping on the heels, and they have products where they don't even think about marketing as like a function. They just say we build great products and people like to use them, and that sort of there's just take up there. And I know it's obviously more complicated than that, but to me, that's one of the most exciting things I'm seeing out there are these sort of neobanks that start with an app and a debit card, a stored value card, and then sort of morph themselves into more generalized banking services. And I think they're going to be a force to reckon with.
Erin, what do you think? Oh, go ahead, Trace. Yeah, please.
I was going to say, to build on that, that's definitely an area. And I think one of the keys there is they think about it differently, right? They're not just marketing the same old checking account or the same old products, and they're thinking about the experiences differently. Where we see success is really when you have that partnership, because the fintech is great. You can build on your innovation. You've got a lot of great things going on. But then you may find some of those deficiencies when you start thinking about compliance and some of the components that need to come to the table. So when you can kind of marry those together with a partner from the financial institution side, that's really where we see some of the wins. When we have those partners we can work with, and we can bring our innovation to the table, they're bringing their understanding and their wealth of knowledge to the table. It kind of works together, and that's really where you can align goals, right? And you can say, here's what we're trying to push out, and see some of those successes. And you're seeing that with the big guys, with folks like Goldman, and where they're investing in the fintech world and where they're purchasing and buying. It's going to keep moving forward in that fashion where there's new players. It's not the same old money movement players out there. So that's a big change, and something that will change the landscape.
I would point you at JP Morgan's coin announcement from last year. JP Morgan had I don't know if everybody saw this, it just kind of popped up. I caught it. They replaced 360,000 man hours with minutes from an AI. And to me, that's where the chickens are starting to come up with roost, right? Because they didn't just wake up one day and go, hey, wow, we found this technology, and next week they implemented it and saved 360,000 hours. They probably said, hey, here's a technology. Let's, look for the best match and see what kind of value we can get out of it. I'm imagining, there was 2 or 3 years in that, but the margin increase on that to be able to say, okay, well, we just dropped, it was lawyers. So I'm guessing at 2,000 hours, 180 lawyers or something, that were looking through these contracts, which they were able to teach the AI to find this much more efficiently. Those kinds of efficiencies are going to widen the margin. And to me, that's where they can really play in the pricing. And, I would point you at Robinhood, right? I think that the lesson learned from the Robinhood debacle is that people really want a 3% account. I mean, just from all the inertia that they got from even saying it, even though it wasn't true. And soon, if you get enough efficiencies and you create that kind of margin, you can do it. But it comes with scale, and it comes with mastery of some other technologies. And that's the part that I'm seeing. I've been pushing a lot is you've got to master analytics before you can sort of get into that AI space because it's dependent upon data. You've got to master, I think identity is going to be in that play. You've got to really come up with a good solution for that and be part of a platform that allows you to do that efficiently and effectively. So that's the big game changer, I think, is we're going to see some big jumps just because some of these chickens are coming home to roost, as I said.
That's exactly right. And you're seeing a lot of this innovation from the big boys coming both internally and from buying big players in the fintech space or even outside of the fintech space in acquisitions, primarily for talent. So you'll see, well, we currently see fintechs working with the smaller and even some of the larger institutions to bring some of this innovation and bring change. So it's coming both from the bigger players who can apply massive amounts of resources to really hard problems like machine learning, as well as the innovative fintechs. And as Tracy had mentioned, it's about partnerships and making sure to use all of the arrows in your quiver appropriately.
Cool. So I want to move to another question since we're running a little tight on time, which is great. It's great to have the conversation. But one of the things with IoT, I think that seems to pop up fairly regularly is security. And I just saw that PricewaterhouseCoopers just released a survey from Gemalto, which is a cybersecurity firm. And apparently, just a couple things to launch this. 48% of companies that use IoT devices don't have security to detect a hack. That was one thing they pulled from the survey. Another was 65% of the companies believe that the IoT security is a way to differentiate them from the competition. So I see those as two wildly divergent facts where they see it as a way to differentiate from the competition, yet very few of them, only half of them, are actually have enough security to detect a hack. So I know this is a concern on the most fundamental level, especially for whether it's, big banks or small credit unions or somewhere in between. But what is the state of security when implementing IoT at this point? Aaron, why don't you touch on this one?
Well, that's been potentially one of the large barriers for banking currently. So as we build solutions in the fintech sector, institutions are very interested in security regulation. So clearly, any solutions that you develop for banks need to play within these bounds. And so we can leave no trace on devices. We just have to be very careful. So that's an additional layer of difficulty as banks look at this technology, but potentially another opportunity as well, because consumers today are relying on the players who have these devices as being the custodian of this data. And as they start to build a distrust towards some of these custodians, the institutions, because they've had to live in a regulated space, always have to be very careful with their data. And there's some places there where as trust may shift, the institutions have a potential opportunity to help in that regard.
And John, I know you have a bit of a background in cybersecurity and blockchain. What do you think?
The thing I hear most is it listening in on me? And there's this perception of, hey, I mentioned I want to do a set of golf clubs around my home, and now my Facebook is filled with Google, golf club ads. That to me is of great concern. I think it's something that
Are they listening on us?
Not that we can see. I mean, we can see that it's listening for its code word, but other than that, if you don't do anything in terms of transmission, we just hooked it to a sniffer to watch. It doesn't appear to be sending anything else out, but it's still hard to argue some of the things we've seen. And I don't know if it's something you have to turn on or turn off, but our normal settings on both just hooking a sniffer and watching what's getting, sent out, there's not enough there for it to be any kind of voice recognition on what it is. It has a hard enough time understanding anything that's not sort of not open-ended in the app, so it's difficult to think about it just sort of picking up things. But you do know it's listening to the TV because, if you saw the South Park episode, where they purposely tried to get everyone's Alexa to order whatever it was. But I think that the security, the voice piece is going to be a big deal. I look at it as the folks who are, I think the reason you're seeing this diversity is because we're at an inflection point around identity. And so there are folks who've sort of figured out, wow, identity is the strategic high ground of everything we do. It's our number one issue, and it's our number one opportunity. And so with that in mind, there are folks who've sort of looked into the different things they could do. And I think that they've discovered that, okay, if these are going to be pervasive, if you're going to have these opportunities to do voice recognition with a simple query or an alert or something like that, they see the value in that. And then I think there are those that have not really embraced the identity opportunity just yet. And it's just, if you don't understand one, it's sort of a binary result, which is it's either bad or good. And I think as understanding goes on around identity, whether it be things like pin drop or whatever the voice piece, as that proliferates, then we're going to see more. We're going to see those numbers shift more as a strategic opportunity, except for the guy that sells a product like this. But I really believe that. I think that we'll see it, because the problem of it listening in onto you will get solved because people just aren't going to have it. And then, that'll be something that'll be a thing of the past. And I think that voice recognition is already there in the Google Home. And there's some of it in Alexa, but it's really going to become something that's even more important as we go on. So for now, I feel like it's, hey, you build a base while you can, and you sort of bet on, in craps terms, you bet on the come, right? You bet we're going to make it out.
All right, so there's time for one more question before we open this up to question and answers from the audience. And so while I see all four of you as evangelists, especially from the fintech side, and the possibilities for the future of fintech, I also think that overpromising for those who are more pragmatic tends to be something that's also important to look at, because not everybody is as optimistic. So if I were to ask you, and I'll ask each of you, what do you think the most overhyped IoT story is at this point? Just since this is myths and realities, we've obviously talked about the realities, and we've talked about the potential power of IoT and banking. But what would you say is the top myth that is out there that, if somebody starts pitching it, you kind of know, well, yeah, that's not really where we are or where we're going to be? What's the snake oil? Aaron, do you want to start us off?
Oh, well, I think the one that I look at as being the one that I've seen the least uptick and least value, and Zach had mentioned it earlier, were beacons. This thought that the location will know when I walk in and give me a contextually relevant ad. I even read an analysis at some point that with beacons, we're going to understand when people are going through the drive-through versus seeing a teller. And, innovative teller solutions can do that without investment in beacons and mobile technology. And I'm not sure that constant presence is something that, at least in this industry, is going to be of much value.
Tracy, what do you think?
That was actually the one that I had noted as well. When we start thinking about, the branch of the future or financial institutions really rethinking their physical presence and how they can do that, when that comes up a lot, sensors and beacons. And not only is there security concerns with all that data being passed across, but also, from a customer experience standpoint, sometimes people find those not as wonderful when you walk into and it's like, boom, you're here, right? So there's a customer experience impact associated with that as well. And I think that's one of the reasons why, to Aaron's point, that one has kind of been talked about quite a bit, but you really haven't seen the success with that. I know there's been some pilots with some of the larger institutions around that. But really, that hasn't been a forward-thinking component when you look at everything you could do there, in my mind. And the challenges from a customer experience standpoint, I think, can be jarring.
John?
I'll echo some of what Tracy said. I think that the myth to me is that IoT is a single market, that it's really just Alexa or Google Home. And I don't see it that way. I think it's many markets, many unique environments. And the key is integration, as it always is, because integration brings utility and utility brings customers. And I think that's what Tracy, was kind of hitting upon there, is that it's valuable when it brings value to them. And so if we look at the integrations, I talked about cameras. I think those have huge value. I think like any other technology, we have to be careful with it, but there's opportunity there. And you think about, there's a lot of flops like, IoT and a juicer or whatever. But when you think about some of your major appliances and having service and maintenance on them, that's very valuable. And I think, automobiles is sort of the next frontier where voice and hands-free makes a lot of sense if you look at the time we spend in the car. So I think that IoT, the myth is IoT is a single market, and it's not. And so that to me is the biggest myth. And so, we're looking already at ways into expanding into a lot of other devices, because I could honestly see a fintech device in your home. Imagine a place where you could put a credit card in, or you could put a fob or something. I mean, I honestly think that we could see that in the future. People would want that sort of security around their money.
Zach?
So I would say blockchain. I sort of always had this vision that I could hook up my some type of wearable to my dog, and the dog walker would come, and the blockchain would register when he leaves the premises, and then when the dog walker brings him back, an instant payment would be made directly through Venmo. There was so much hype last year in blockchain and how blockchain interacts with the Internet of Things, it feels like it just completely got swallowed up with Bitcoin's collapse in price. And I do think blockchain, particularly as it relates to IoT, does have the potential to be one of the most transformative things I've seen in finance, but we're so far away from it. To date, most people can't even come up with a good use case for it. But I also think, just going back to what John said, like I think like the payment fobs and rings that kind of got hyped up a couple years ago. I guess the Olympics, MasterCard came out with a ring, and I don't see a lot of people using those either. I don't think it was as hyped, but I don't know. I'm a little more sanguine in this because I felt like I went through the hype cycle and got excited about it. Now I'm kind of like recovering.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think also some of these it takes that level of trust in creating the value out of them. I think that sometimes the challenge is that what we can do is different than what we want to do. And that always is a measure of, the customers and how you're listening to your clients. So I think we're going to need to wrap up this portion of it and sort of throw this back to Amy. Amy, do you have questions from the audience that you want to?
There are a couple, and I'll throw them out there, and the first person that can answer them, great, and then we'll just kind of cut it from there. But okay, the first one, so many financial institution sites are not even optimized for voice search, yet alone introduced voice-activated control of accounts for their customers. What does the panel think it is going to take to shift the industry?
I just real quick, I want to make sure I understand the question. I don't know if anybody else is struggling. So the question is, people have jumped ahead to these voice devices without even voice optimizing their website. Is that kind
Yeah,
of the question?
that's what it looks like. Yes.
Yeah, I think that some people are looking at it as a solution because it is so difficult to get ADA certified in the website, in particular when you have multi-language options and those sorts of things. But I think that regulation is what's going to shift the industry, and we're already seeing that to some extent.
Okay, let me get here's a couple more. What are your opinions of what Samsung is doing with their Viv Labs Incorporated acquisition and the rollout of the new Samsung Bixby 2.0 voice services?
I'll real jump on that. Viv scares the crap out of me. Viv sounds like Skynet. It's amazing. So for those of you that don't know, the inventor of Siri left, started his own company. I actually mentioned his stuff in my book, and he created a bot that creates its own code to go do things. Really not a bot, but an entity. I think if it works, it's going to be amazing, but it has the potential to be. I'm interested. I'm really interested, but it literally does scare me because it can create its own code. You should look it up. It's pretty cool. Viv.ai.
Okay. Well, let me give you guys one more, and anybody can jump in. Is implementing any of these strategies cost prohibitive for a small financial institution?
We've tiered our pricing to help small financial institutions. We think it is definitely some good bait for the millennials and those sorts of folks that they'll be just sort of wanting to check that box with that service. And they will use it, but it won't be a primary use. It'll still be their mobile. But as it develops, as I mentioned before, it gains capability. I think it'll have a greater play in the channel because multi-modal channel is going to be the future. But no, I think it's a decent strategy if you look at it from an acquisition standpoint.
Yeah, and Aaron,
And I'd even go one further that depending, you might be able to look at this as a way to get up on the big boys. That some innovative fintech partners are looking to deploy this out for smaller institutions, and maybe you can hit the market before they do.
I think Aaron said it well, is really, it could be an opportunity. A lot of the smaller banks are really looking for a way to attract and bring in those new acquisitions. And that could be a great way. I mean, a lot of fintech companies are out there looking for partners to work with in that space. And I couldn't agree more, Aaron. It's a great way to kind of go after that customer base that you've been kind of fighting for. So.
All right. Well, it is 3:00. I wanted to thank all of you guys for being on today. And like I said, this is going to be recorded. So everybody that's been on today will get an email within 24 hours with a link. And if you guys have any questions for me or the panelists, you can get in touch with me through the email address that was provided with the GoToWebinar registration. And again, thank you all for being here.